We're good. We can get started. Cool. I have the first point in the agenda. So I'll share my screen just so I can provide a little more context. I think that would be the easiest way to go about soliciting some feedback. So initially, my team was adding a feature to the approver section in projects. So instead of having human approvers, you could have essentially like a service do an approval of a merge request. So some sort of like API call. And to us, it made perfect sense of like, okay, the action of what this performer is doing is approving a merge request. It isn't going to be blocking initially, but maybe one day it could be like requiring all of those virtual approvals to happen. So what we did was just modify the form to incorporate a secondary type of approval. Feedback I got from Kai and Pedro was this approvers is meant to be more like human driven, which I didn't know necessarily when I was designing on the onset of introducing this feature, since we had some other like types of approvals in the mix, like with vulnerability checks and license checks, which I now better understand, but they weren't as fully fleshed out back then when I was initially designing the feature. And so the pain point I'm running into now is like we've already started development on the feature, and source code was essentially worried about this impacting the experience of a merge request, which has a lot of active users. So it's very high priority and we don't want to impact it negatively. So they were asking us to kind of stop work. We were saying, no, we don't really want to stop work on this necessarily. We still think like our direction is okay. The one area that I was considering a pivot was we wanted to add this into initially like the approvers section. So there'd be like human approvers and then your virtual approvers through like these approval gates. And I'm conceding to say I think it would be okay to at least pivot to moving this into like the merge request widget section, I think is how this is referred to. So instead of having it here, you'd have it appear here as like an optional check for your merge. My struggle is like, what do you all do when you run into situations, and maybe it doesn't happen as often for your group, but where you're impacting something downstream and the other group's like, no, I don't want you to do that. You're like, hey, I tried to engage you early, but we didn't really come to a fruitful decision a while back. So it seems kind of late in the game to bring it up.
I think in this case, I'd want to know what their complaint is against it. I think the need for it is important. And if it's impacting whatever they're saying is like, well, yes, that's your point. It's there to stop rule or MRs from going through without the check. And it only applies in the case where the check is needed. It's not just a global thing that's automatically done. So if a non-compliant mind organization doesn't need it, then they're never going to see this, right? I think, but also backing up too, I think, at least from when I was working in compliance, the idea was not just for an individual person, but for like automated systems or bots as individual approvers or checks in the line to help with that, not necessarily a specific person. I don't know if that's changed since, but just in terms of like, I don't think there's much difference between this or any other the checks that exist currently in the MR process. So I'm not sure what the complaint is from them. So which I don't understand why you would need to pivot.
Yeah, I think it mostly stemmed from maybe more attention to the merge request page itself and its performance aspects. There were questions around it being a confusing user experience. What we were trying to do was extend the functionality of an existing feature, whereas their opinion was this is not applicable to this feature at all. It should be its own thing. So I still see it, like you said, valuable as like an iteration that we can introduce into the product, because it does give the users functionality to actually bring these checks into GitLab because they're happening just externally now. So I think it's still a valuable change. It's just a matter of, well, now we kind of have to negotiate last minute, which I don't like doing, small changes to engineering. And so Holly, I think you were going to make a point. I wanted to hear what you had to say.
I appreciate it, but actually, after hearing this situation, maybe my response isn't quite as applicable as it was when I just kind of read the question and threw an answer out there. Of course, it was just about understanding risk of not completing the request versus the complexity that might be associated with implementing it. But it sounds like maybe there was a communication opportunity that was lost or, not potentially properly addressed.
Yeah.
Daniel, I think, I don't know if that was Austin typing out your response.
Yeah, I was putting in some thoughts for Daniel, but yeah, he was saying like, ask why, better understand like what's the reasoning for like stopping the work, which we did get to a good discussion point. I think some of the problem did lie on the fact that my previous PM hadn't coordinated super well across the groups, even though I was like coordinating with Pedro a bit. And so I think just continuing to keep that in mind in the future, that we should have, to what Mike is saying in his point, I'll let him discuss it, but tying in more earlier on with other groups to better understand the problem that we're trying to solve together could prevent these pain points in the future.
So I know that Pedro has done a great bit of work on mapping the object model of the MR and the different types of interactions and functions and stuff that come along for the specific MR. And I wonder with this exercise, whether you can sort of reflect on the content that's been shared and documented within that object model and think, could this have informed the decision-making process a little bit more upfront? Could it have aided with communication in any way? And if not, what information was lacking that could have been there in order to sort of ensure that this didn't work, this didn't go the way that it has now? It seems like from like at the high level from what you talked about, there's like a misalignment in like the narrative of or like I'm trying to figure out the feature that you're proposing, or the extension of the feature you're proposing, didn't align with the narrative that Pedro had in mind for that particular feature. So I wonder whether there's a gap there that could somehow be documented for future cases where this may happen.
Yeah, I think that's a really great articulation of it, Nick. And I would even say probably when we first were discussing this feature, which I think this was like maybe last August or September, we were talking about it. That might not have even have been defined yet. And then it was like, as they went down and did more research into the architecture of a merge request, and then started to put parameters around to like, what do each of these things mean? Like, what does the approver section mean? What do the MR widgets mean? That hadn't necessarily gotten around to me thinking about like, okay, maybe that should impact how we introduce this feature either. So, as probably Pedro was thinking about it more and working through with Kai on like defining these things to help people better contribute to merge requests themselves. We just hadn't necessarily maybe thought about it in that vein back in the past. So yeah, I think it makes sense.
I can definitely understand the challenge though, because MRs, the majority of usage for MRs sort of comes within the realm of source code management and all this sort of stuff. So as a team is trying to kickstart a feature off, which requires an interaction from an MR, it's quite difficult to iterate in a small way on it without impacting the broader interface. So finding that right balance is incredibly difficult. So I can empathize with you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think the other thing that we struggle with too is how do we enable things with feature flags or not? We opted to not use, or to not have on by default. So we are requesting that users turn on a feature flag in order to use this specifically, knowing that it's probably going to be going under some revisions in the future, and getting some select customers to actually use it because they've been demanding it would be helpful for understanding how is it actually getting incorporated into their workflow and not hypothetically incorporated into their workflow. So I'm hopeful that we'll still be able to get the insights that we were looking for out of a first release, but it is a little painful to have to make a pivot at the last minute, but trying to keep it small small as a pivot as possible so I don't upset engineering. Luckily, we hadn't actually built or planned anything yet for the merge request page, but as I was kind of like showing, we had already built the ability to create it. So just like, okay, how does it render? We can affect that, but this part's maybe a little bit too late to back out of for this milestone. Mike, did you want to talk more about your concept of like a kickoff issue before I punt it over to Holly?
Yeah, what's been in my mind a lot lately is when we have cross-functional or not cross-functional, cross-team collaboration. I don't know of any rituals that are documented in the handbook or that we practice consistently. And one of the rituals that I've seen work well in the past is a kickoff. And normally, in an office environment where everyone shows up in their snazziest clothes and their hair is groomed, and they all get into a big room and there's a lot of energy. Kickoffs are really fun, but it can also be really time consuming. And so I think we have unique advantage to go asynchronous first and really just make a kickoff issue. And I guess in the kickoff issue, we want to make sure that stakeholders have voiced something other than a thumbs up reaction, that stakeholders have voiced any concerns or potential risks. And if we're not getting a lot of activity, then we fall back to a synchronous addition. But I think in the past, I've seen kickoffs work really well for cross-team collaboration. It's a way to find alignment. It's a way to have a shared language about the goal. And the goal becomes bigger than the minutia that each individual team is concerned about.
Yeah, I like that. And I think a way we could incorporate that into our issue template, if I'm remembering correctly, is there's a section in there that asks, like, is this a cross-stage feature relating the issue to that issue, and then showing a section like where did this discussion happen would be useful to make sure we have a way to backtrack and say, okay, where did we come up with these decisions? Because right now it kind of gets interspersed as a bunch of comments on like designs that get uploaded to GitLab, and then like threads in the issue itself. And then, yeah, I think having at least a single source of truth for that cross-stage collaboration would be good. I like that idea.
I'll just jump in unless Mike has anything else he wants to add to that, and say that I love this idea. As he was talking though about the meeting where everybody comes in and they're all dressed up, I did feel a sense of, there is one thing that I like about that, and that is that it makes that setting feel a little bit more celebratory, a little bit more unified, and there's a bit more of a sense of this is something that we all need to have on our radar. Whereas just a traditional issue, it tends to kind of get lost in the flow a little bit for me. So I love the idea, if we did pursue something like this, of just having like kickoff in the title or something that helps to kind of separate it a little bit, so it doesn't kind of feel like it gets lost. And maybe a label could be another way to do it. I don't know, but I love the idea of doing that. That would be my only thought about going with something like that for an issue.
I'm getting a little bit, so this kickoff issue would basically like be an ad hoc issue, which would be spun up whenever the opportunity of some cross-stage feature comes up.
That's how I interpret it.
Okay. I was just clarifying. And
yeah,
that
to basically avoid this pain point down the road of, oh, we didn't do enough cross-stage collaboration early in the process, so now we're kind of paying for it because we didn't truly come down to a unified vision as I had thought we had when we initially did, but we hadn't. Otherwise,
so when would you spin up a kickoff issue as opposed to just commenting within the context of an issue that you're working on currently? So for example, you and your team have been discussing the approvals gate, which sounds like Watergate almost, approvals gate thing, and like I think in this instance, you just like put a comment in there and say, look, this is what we were thinking. Could you review the designs in the context of this issue or whatever? When would you do that, as opposed to when would you do a kickoff issue? Is my question here.
Personally, I would say once you have a problem defined, well, if you have something in problem validation and you want to start moving into workflow design and you know it's cross stage, you should at least start having that kickoff discussion there, because then that other group you're working with could better help you identify existing solutions that might already exist to help solve the problem, or better help you scope the solutions that you're starting to design, and that at least creates that tie into it. Now, I don't know if that would become overwhelming, like you would have too many of those floating out there that they would lose their priority, but
yeah, I think experimenting with it, we'll probably have to hash out more of the detail there, because
yeah.
I can see some cases where having the kickoff issue would be useful for differentiating. I can see some cases where having it just in the scope of the issue that you, like your initial idea was in,
Yeah.
was potentially there. It's equivalent to like having design issues almost. Like sometimes having an independent design issue is good because you can document more detail. Sometimes just having the design in the context of the broader issue is more useful. So I think experimenting probably provides a little bit more context as to rules of thumb as to when it's good to do that versus when it's good just to have a comment or something.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll definitely tie it up here, and we'll jump over to Holly's point so we have some time to discuss it. But definitely think for merge request at the very least, because it is such a impactful feature to the GitLab experience, there should definitely be a tie-in with like the different groups that own the features specifically for it.
And add one more thing, which is issues have different intentions, right? You create an issue to elevate a problem. You create an issue to track the progress of defining that problem. We create an issue to track who we're recruiting to validate that problem. In this case, it'd be an issue to gain alignment. So, you know, rather than trying to gain alignment in a comment thread of an issue intended to explore a design, we create an issue to gain alignment. It's an issue for every occasion. As Holly knows. On to you, Holly.
Thank you. This is just kind of a question that's came about from a conversation with another designer last week. We were kind of having a coffee chat and I asked them how their day was going, and they said they were feeling a little discouraged because they feel like they don't always have the time to do all the things that they need to do in a day. And I kind of echoed that sentiment at that particular moment, but every now and then I will go to our product designer sort of expectations page and just look at all the things that I know I need to be doing. And almost every single time I'll see something and think, oh my gosh, I should have been doing, you know, contributions actively to the pajamas design system. Like I find myself periodically working on those issues, but I don't know that I'm intentional about seeking them out. And there are a few cases that are like that. And every time there's this kind of weight and this sinking feeling in me, like how did I not know that I needed to be doing that? Or how did it slip off my radar? And I feel like some folks do this really, really well. So I'm just curious what maybe techniques, you know, some of you use to stay on top of all the things that are not related to feature work. I know I had spoken with Marcel about this a few months ago, and he said he very intentionally blocks off time each week to dedicate to certain things that are not necessarily feature or even OKR work. And I'm curious if anyone else does anything like that, or if there are any other methods that you use to ensure that these things don't slip off of your radar.
I try and just give myself like 1 hour of the week to look at other things, just throw it on my calendar, other work, pajamas time or whatever, just so I'm intentionally doing it. I don't always succeed. I don't actually produce something all the time, but at least I'm thinking about it and looking about it, see how I can get to it.
Yeah, every every role has, the top things that you need to do daily. That's a daily operation to keep things moving smoothly. The reason I put the Eisenhower matrix up there is I know that sometimes where our time is driven by our calendar, or our time is driven by whose attention, who's the squeakiest wheel. And the Eisenhower matrix helps us put those things into context and prioritize accordingly. And you could use it on a day-to-day basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis. But the important thing is that the most important things get done first. And in the product designer responsibilities, I believe giving feedback in MRs is the first thing. Is my memory failing me? Okay.
The first thing is, actually, I've got the priorities list here so that I can refer to it periodically each week. The first one is merge requests, followed by designers' feedback requests from other designers.
Yeah, so if that's the thing that's kind of pushing our attention, I could see how it'd be frustrating that you don't find you have time for other things, like let alone career growth, right? Like doing courses in LinkedIn Learning, or wherever you prefer to learn. So yeah, I'm just saying I would love to hear other people's tactics on how they do that. I think Austin, you were next.
Yeah, and mine's not like very prescriptive, but generally my approach since joining GitLab so far is not to like think about my responsibilities on like necessarily a week-to-week basis, but more of a like longer period of time, because it does feel like there are maybe like stretches where there are 3 or 4 weeks when I'm just really focused on feature work and like really diving into research. And then there'll be like a stretch of time where I just have more space to fit in some contributions to the handbook or feedback with other designers. And that feels better to me. So when I can go back and look at the responsibilities for a designer, as I look for like evidence of doing those things, I can think, oh, I haven't done anything for pajamas in 6 months. I should really prioritize something this quarter to start doing something, because that is part of my responsibilities. And I either neglected to do it, or rather had been prioritizing other things over it. To say I'm going to do a little bit this quarter really isn't that much of a ask, I would say. So I like what you're saying though, Holly. Like, I don't want to feel bad about not doing the things, but just having the reminder to myself, like, okay, yeah, I've been focused more on feature work, but I have other responsibilities and I can dedicate a little bit of time to them for this quarter or this milestone, whatever works in your schedule, without being like overly prescriptive of I'm only going to work on pajamas 1 hour a week on Wednesdays, because it's just not always feasible for, at least the way that I work, to fit that in. As much as I love structuring my days, sometimes that can feel too rigorous to manage.
Do you literally have a reminder system though, or do you it's just kind of in the back of your mind always, and you just say not right now, but when I get time I will?
So one thing that's been useful for me is I've been doing these like asynchronous UX office hours. I'm kind of reviewing what I did on a weekly basis, and I can kind of feel the trend of I spent a lot of time merge requests this week. I spent a lot of time in pajamas. I spent a lot of time on features. And then just over time, I can kind of feel what is like, okay, I haven't really given a lot of attention to user research in a while. That's going to become more of a priority in Q2 for sure. So it's not a hard and fast rule for sure. It is kind of just something in the back of my mind, which I realize is then carrying some sort of like mental weight on myself, but I haven't found a great reminder tool that I don't end up just snoozing anyways.
I know we have a coffee chat after this, so I want to hear more about your asynchronous time there, your design time to think through that. Thank you so much. And thank you all for your thoughts and comments on this. I don't want to take up the rest of the time in case anyone has anything else they want to share, but that was very insightful and I appreciate your feedback.
Nick shared a quarterly planning issue that is really cool if you pop it open. And then Daniel, you try to set aside an hour at a time each week to dedicate?
Yeah, I just throw like 1 hour on my calendar that says specifically pajamas time.
I like it.
Soon enough, we should be able to measure the distribution of your work within the product as well, Holly. Like based on the issue types thing that you're doing right now, you could effectively have like an issue type for your product planning and seeing the distribution of where you're allocating your time as a designer. We're doing that in value stream, so you'll be able to create a personal value stream based on the different types of work items that you're working on, and you'll see a distribution of where you're spending your time week by week. So you can work that at different levels, from personal all the way to team level and beyond.
Nice, that's good to know. I've tried doing like diaries, you know, just kind of keeping a log of the things that I'm doing each day, just to see where all of my time is going, and it's been really insightful. But that would be much easier. Yeah, welcome back, Alexis. Hope you had a nice trip or a nice time off.
Hello, nice to see y'all.
Were you in Hawaii?
No, I was in, well, our last stop was Vegas, and so I'm kind of like out of it from a dune buggy crash, but hey, I'm here. Nice to see y'all.
You have any GoPro footage of the dune buggy crash? Oh, shucks.
No,
Okay?
sadly or not sadly, I guess.
Are you okay? You kind of did this to your neck when you
Yeah, no, that's the thing, but I'm getting better. But you know, there always has to be a misadventure with adventure, so it's okay.
as long as you don't break your neck.
And at least it sounds like it's a good story rather than like just tripping going upstairs, which would be my story.
Yeah, that's usually my story, Holly. But yeah, it was good. We got stuck in some dunes and hiked around Utah, so it was fun. And avoiding people in Vegas was a sport also. So it was good. I'm glad to be back there, y'all. It's good to see you.
I think we are at time unless anyone has anything else. All right. Have a great rest of your day, y'all. Have a good week.